black woman boards a long-haul international flight, seat 1A, first class. No one insults her. No one shouts. They just don't say her name. Her meal is quietly swapped. Her drink never arrives. Her presence treated like background noise. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't demand. She simply watches, and in that silence, something begins to track. This is not a story about confrontation. It's a story about being deliberately unseen and choosing to be undeniable. When the plane lands, nothing seems different. But behind the scenes, the system is already shaking. Listen closely, because when someone like her stays quiet, that's when you should be afraid. Before we begin, if this kind of slow, powerful storytelling speaks to you, take a second to hit subscribe. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop it in the comments. Your couch, a late-night drive, maybe even a quiet airport gate. All right, a black woman boards a long-haul international flight, seat 1A, first class. No one insults her. No one shouts. They just don't say her name. Her meal is quietly swapped. Her drink never arrives. Her presence treated like background noise. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't demand. She simply watches, and in that silence, something begins to track. This is not a story about confrontation. It's a story about being deliberately unseen and choosing to be undeniable. When the plane lands, nothing seems different. But behind the scenes, the system is already shaking. Listen closely, because when someone like her stays quiet, that's when you should be afraid. Before we begin, if this kind of slow, powerful storytelling speaks to you, take a second to hit subscribe. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop it in the comments. Your couch, a late-night drive, maybe even a quiet airport gate. All right. Let's begin. Priority boarding now open for Diamond Plus members. The voice over the loudspeaker was crisp, emotionless, like an automated gatekeeper guarding a world built for a specific kind of passenger. Celeste Morgan stood up slowly. She adjusted the collar of her navy blazer, smoothed the crease at her wrist, and reached for her black leather handbag. A. Hermes, understated but unmistakable. Around her, soft jazz filtered through the air, mingling with the scent of bergamot and polished leather. She walked forward, calm, centered, and utterly unshaken by the silence that followed her. At the boarding gate, a young agent in a navy blue uniform smiled brightly at the tall white man just behind her. "Mr. Radcliffe, welcome back. We've prepared your preferred seating." Then the agent turned to Celeste and simply nodded. No name. Celeste didn't flinch. She didn't pause. She was far too familiar with this small, precise cut, sharp not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The walk to the plane was quiet. No one ahead, no one behind. Just the muted thud of her heels on carpet, the wheeze of recycled air from the jet bridge, and the hollow silence of being seen, but not really seen. First class felt like a showroom, like stepping into a perfectly staged illusion. Cream-colored leather seats angled toward each other with just the right amount of intimacy. Champagne flutes gleamed under gentle overhead lights. The air was cool and carried a hint of citrus and steel. Celeste stepped in without hesitation, gliding into the aisle as if this narrow corridor was built for her. She had walked into plenty of rooms where no one expected her to belong. First class was just another boardroom, upholstered and flying at 35,000 feet. As she reached seat 1A, she lifted her bag into the overhead bin without looking around for help. Her movements were practiced, smooth, unhurried. Everything about her said, "I've earned this space," without needing to say a word. That was when Becky appeared. Blonde hair tied low at the nape of her neck, uniform pressed crisp, not a single thread out of place. Her smile was perfect, right down to the calculated warmth behind her eyes. "Welcome aboard," she said, not quite looking directly at Celeste. Celeste offered a soft nod in return, nothing more. The woman's gaze had already shifted. to the man behind her. "Mr. Radcliffe, it's lovely to see you again. We have your Chateau Lafite waiting. Shall I have it ready before takeoff?" Her voice had texture now, color. It danced slightly at the end of each syllable, like she'd just seen an old friend. Celeste sat down in 1A, adjusting the armrest, brushing a speck of dust from her seatbelt buckle. She didn't turn to look back. She didn't need to. The scene had already played out 100 times in 100 different settings. The woman in seat 1A had the highest tier status, the most valuable itinerary, the most high-profile destination, and yet no one said her name. She unfolded her tablet slowly. On its screen, the final merger draft with the Swiss data security conglomerate. A deal that would seal Morgan Tech's expansion into Europe. A deal that would reshape how the global tech world saw leadership, race, and power. Her stylus hovered, then tapped. Across from her, a man with salt and pepper hair in seat 1C was already sipping from a glass of Dom Perignon. A server handed him a menu with both hands, bowed slightly, and addressed him by his surname. No one offered Celeste a menu. She didn't ask. Not yet. Her gaze wandered briefly around the cabin. 6 men, all in tailored suits. They reclined, smiled, tapped on expensive watches. Their laughter was low, confident, familiar with the altitude. A soft sound of heels echoed behind her, controlled, deliberate. "Good afternoon, ma'am," came a voice. Celeste turned slightly. "Becky." Her smile was now mechanical, slightly tighter at the corners. "I'll be serving you today during this flight," she said, handing Celeste a damp towelette without making direct eye contact. "I believe you've received my pre-order from last week," Celeste said. Her voice was soft but precise. There was no room for misinterpretation. She wasn't asking. Becky's expression didn't change. "Of course," she said quickly. "We'll begin service once we're at cruising altitude." Then she turned, walking away before Celeste could respond. Her steps were light, quick, but not rushed, practiced, confident that nothing in her actions warranted a second thought. Celeste exhaled slowly. She wasn't angry, not yet, but she recognized the performance, the effortless way professionalism had been weaponized into distance, the exact shade of politeness that erased the person while preserving the facade. Just past the divider, a younger flight attendant passed by, a woman with darker skin, tightly pinned curls, and a name tag that read, "Kayla." Their eyes met for just a moment. Kayla didn't speak, but her expression flickered, an almost invisible shift between recognition and restraint. Then she looked away and kept moving. Celeste understood. Not everyone was in a position to speak. Some people had everything to lose, and no illusions about the consequences of making someone uncomfortable, even if that someone was wrong. But Celeste wasn't here to make noise. She was here to make impact. She leaned back in her seat. Outside, the sun was dipping behind cloud banks, turning the wing of the aircraft into a strip of gold. Inside, the light above her seat blinked once, indicating the meal service would begin soon. Her fingers drummed softly on the armrest. One rhythm, one question, one certainty. Would they call her by her name? Because if they didn't, she already knew what would come next. The overhead light flickered once, the gentle chime echoed through the cabin. Meal service was beginning. Celeste Morgan didn't move. She sat perfectly still in seat 1A, tablet resting on her lap, fingers gently poised. Outside the window, clouds stretched like silk, untouched. Inside, the air shifted, subtle but changing. Footsteps approached. Becky Whitmore appeared beside her, holding a silver tray with both hands, but there was no wine, no bisque, no scent of warm, plated luxury. Instead, a plastic-wrapped chicken sandwich, a single paper napkin, and a clear glass of room-temperature water, beads of condensation gathering on the rim. Becky's voice was polite but blank. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we've run out of your pre-ordered entree." That was it. No explanation, no apology, Not even eye contact. Her words came with the same tone one might use to mention the weather. Celeste blinked once, slowly. Then she turned, fully, to face the attendant. "I pre-ordered my meal 7 days ago," she said calmly. "I have the confirmation, the booking reference, and even the reminder email from Stratus." Becky gave a small dismissive shrug. Her notepad flapped loosely in one hand. "Maybe the system wasn't updated. Happens all the time," she replied, already half turned away. And then she walked off. No glance back, no alternative offered. Just a tray, a shrug, and silence. Celeste looked down at the tray in front of her. The sandwich sat there, lifeless. White bread, wilted lettuce, no silver cutlery, no ceramic plate, just plastic, paper, and forgetfulness. It wasn't about food anymore. She tapped her tablet. The screen flickered to life. Her fingers danced across it, not hurried, but deliberate, efficient. Each movement sharp, economical. She opened the Morgan Tech client portal, authenticated via biometric ID, and pulled up her Stratus passenger profile. Meal preference: lobster bisque, prime filet, Chateau Margaux 2012. Status: Diamond Plus member, reservation confirmed. Timestamp 7:42 AME EST, 7 days prior. Every detail was intact, a complete, verified record. The system had not made a mistake. Celeste stared at the line that read, "Guaranteed premium meal, confirmed." She closed the app, then opened another, one that most passengers would never see. Morgan Tech Shadow Track. Internal audit access for verified executive-level users. A blue icon blinked faintly at the top right of her screen, syncing with aircraft internal node. Celeste didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply tapped one button on her smartwatch. 4 rows back, Kayla Dandridge was reviewing her cabin checklist. She had noticed it. The moment Becky placed that sandwich in front of the woman in 1A, something inside Kayla tensed, not in shock, but in recognition. It wasn't the first time. She glanced toward the forward galley. Becky was laughing quietly now, chatting with one of the male passengers. Kayla looked back at her own tablet. She scrolled through the passenger manifest. Seat 2A, Morgan, Celeste, Diamond Plus. Meal, lobster bisque, filet, red wine. She stared at the screen. Her finger hovered above a small icon. Report discrepancy. She didn't press it. Instead, she turned and continued pushing the service cart down the aisle, her lips pressed into a thin, invisible line. She had bills, a mother in Houston, a son starting school. This wasn't her fight, not this time, but even as she passed, she knew this moment would follow her. Back in 1A, Celeste leaned slightly forward. She swiped to a secure messaging app, opened a preset thread, and typed just 6 words. Pre-978. Whitmore. Confirm violation. Audit. The message sent, with no alert, no ping. Just a green checkmark. Miles away across the Atlantic, in an office on the 42nd floor of Morgan Tech's Manhattan Tower, a screen lit up. Aaliyah Grant, Senior Executive Assistant and Head of Behavioral Systems, leaned in. Her monitor displayed one line. Audit target, Rebecca A. Whitmore. Flight 917, passive mode only. Aaliyah pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and began typing. Back in the sky, laughter echoed faintly through the cabin. Crystal glasses clinked. Becky returned, this time holding a bottle of vintage champagne wrapped in a white cloth. "For you, Mr. Radcliffe," she said, her tone rich with familiarity. "Still as crisp as last winter, right?" The man chuckled, nodded, accepted the glass like a ritual well practiced. Then Becky turned. She passed by seat 1A without slowing, without turning her head. She never once looked at Celeste, never once asked if she needed anything, as if the space she occupied did not matter, as if she did not exist. Celeste didn't look up. She didn't call out, she simply opened another window on her tablet. A crew profile list appeared. Her fingertip moved down the screen, stopping at one name. Whitmore, Rebecca Ann, Senior Cabin Attendant. ID, STA935. Next to it, a gray icon. Internal notes available, tap to view. Celeste tapped once. The screen began to load. Outside the window, the plane flew over the Atlantic, cutting through clouds with quiet authority. Inside, something had shifted. This wasn't about miscommunication. It wasn't about staffing error. And it definitely wasn't about a sandwich. The scent of citrus had faded. In its place, a richer aroma took over. The buttery warmth of lobster bisque, the oaky trace of red wine uncorked midair, the comfort of being remembered. Becky Whitmore returned to the aisle, holding a crystal glass delicately between her fingers. "For you, Mr. Radcliffe," she smiled. "Still your favorite, isn't it? Just like your flight in December." He chuckled. "You've got a good memory, Becky." "Only for the best passengers," she replied, her voice sliding effortlessly between charm and familiarity. Celeste sat 3 feet away, watching without watching. No one had asked her if she wanted anything else. No one had offered a substitute for the meal she'd reserved. No one had even said her name. Not once. She leaned back in seat 1A, arms resting gently on the sides, body relaxed, but mind alert. Stillness had always been her most powerful form of resistance. The name-calling continued like a kind of ritual, as if the ability to be known, to be named, was part of the ticket price. "Mr. Clayton, we've brought your sparkling water chilled just the way you like it. Miss Darrow, would you prefer the Chardonnay or the Riesling? Mr. Esposito, the chef recommends the seared duck tonight. Shall I put that in for you?" Each name spoken with care, with intention, as though belonging was confirmed through repetition, and yet through all of it, Celeste remained nameless. "Ma'am, can I clear this for you?" a male attendant asked, motioning toward the untouched sandwich on her tray. Celeste glanced up. "You can use my name," she said softly. "It's Celeste." The man blinked, smiled somewhat embarrassed. "Of course, ma'am. My apologies." He cleared the tray and left without ever saying her name. 2 rows back, Caleb paused at the edge of the galley. Her hands gripped a tray of coffee cups that barely trembled, but her knuckles were white. She had heard it. All of it. She looked down at her crew tablet, thumb hovering above the passenger manifest. Seat 1A. Morgan, Celeste. Diamond Plus. Meal. Confirmed. Status. Priority. Flagged. Her finger moved toward the note icon. The one labeled Report Discrepancy, but she didn't touch it. Her chest tightened. She remembered another flight 2 years ago, when she'd made the mistake of using a passenger's name. A black woman, seated in business class, had smiled when Kayla called her Miss Henderson. The next morning, Kayla got pulled into an office. "We expect a consistent tone of service, Kayla. You were a little familiar, that's all." No one had said it was about race. No one ever said it. They just made sure she knew the rules were different, depending on who was watching. Back in 1A, Celeste tapped her stylus lightly against her tablet screen. The soft clicks were barely audible, like distant rain, but what she was building wasn't weather, it was evidence. She created a new page, cabin behavior log, flight 917, timestamp, categorized, neutral in tone, clinical in detail. Becky W. greeted passenger in 1B by name, Radcliffe. Poured drink, referenced prior flight, did not acknowledge passenger in 1A by name at any point. She added new lines as each pattern repeated. Passenger in 1C addressed as Mr. Clayton. Passenger in 2A addressed as Miss Darrow. Passenger in 1A equals ma'am 3 times. No name. It wasn't about ego, or pride, or even etiquette. It was about invisibility, and how it operated not with noise, but with omission. Footsteps approached again. Kayla. She wasn't scheduled to cover first class. She was here delivering extra linen, a small excuse to move closer. She didn't speak, just passed through the narrow aisle, eyes carefully averted from everyone, except Celeste. Their eyes met, just for a second. Celeste didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked. Calm, direct, knowing. And then she gave a nod, small, respectful, almost imperceptible. Kayla felt it like a weight she wasn't prepared to carry. She walked past, body still upright, hands steady, but her throat had tightened. She reached the back of the cabin, set the linen aside, and stood alone for a moment. The incident panel was built into the wall, next to the emergency drawer. Discreet. Easy to access, designed for crew members to log soft complaints or irregularities without raising alarm. Kayla placed her hand near the screen. The button glowed blue. Open Incident Report. Her finger hovered. She didn't press it, not yet. Behind her, the soft hum of the aircraft filled the silence. Seat 1A sat at the front of the cabin, the first to receive everything except acknowledgement. She had the highest status, the cleanest record, the strongest credentials. She was the most powerful person on the flight and yet somehow the least recognized. And that was the point. This wasn't about a mistake. It was about a culture, one that dressed itself in professionalism while quietly deciding who deserved to be fully seen. Kayla stared at the blue-lit button, and then, slowly, she pulled her hand away. But as she walked back toward the galley, something in her changed. For the first time, she turned back. Just once. Her eyes met Celeste's for the second time, and this time, they didn't look away. Not yet. Not anymore. The light above seat 1A dimmed slightly, shifting from soft white to a warm amber glow. It was a signal for rest, but Celeste Morgan wasn't planning to rest. She didn't change her posture, didn't adjust the seat, didn't ask for a blanket or tea. Instead, she tapped the side of her smartwatch, just once, and the screen came to life. Her fingers moved quickly, silently. Pre-917A. Audit request, passive mode. Subject, Whitmore, R.A. She hit send. A brief green checkmark appeared, then disappeared. That was all. To the cabin crew, to the other passengers, to the world around her. Celeste looked like any other frequent flyer, scrolling through her watch before reclining for the night. But in that moment, an invisible line had been crossed. And somewhere 5 floors above the Manhattan fog, someone else noticed. Aaliyah Grant was in her office at Morgan Tech's Midtown headquarters. The space was all clean lines and brushed steel, a minimalist design built for people who thought at 200 miles per hour. 3 screens surrounded her, each humming faintly, tracking internal system flows, behavior analytics, and biometric drift patterns across pilot programs. She was halfway through a debugging report when her right monitor blinked. Behavioral audit triggered source Stratus 917. Subject, Seat 1A Initiative, Morgan. See, Aaliyah leaned in. Her expression didn't change, just a slight narrowing of the eyes. She keyed in her authorization code and pulled up the live feed from Stratus 917's cabin environment. Not video. That would have required escalation. But behavior tracking, heat maps, audio signatures, timing logs. Within seconds, the story unfolded in data. Passenger in 1A, not called by name, not greeted with standard engagement script. Pre-order meal denied. Service time delay 5.7 minutes over class average. Attendant tone analysis, neutral to cold. Smile frequency, non-genuine. AI threshold less than 0.38. The lines didn't lie. They didn't interpret. They showed exactly what had happened. Celeste hadn't overreacted. She hadn't imagined anything. She had waited, collected. Back in the sky, the aircraft cruised at 37,000 feet, somewhere above the cold sweep of the North Atlantic. The passengers had begun to settle in. Some reclined, eye masks on. Others sipped liqueur while scrolling through movie selections. Seat 1A remained upright. Celeste's tablet was in rest mode, the screen dark. But on her wrist, her smartwatch flashed again. A silent update. Lost live. Passive collection in progress. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat. Because this wasn't a game. It wasn't revenge. It was exposure. Let the world think she was passive. She knew better. Lydia's fingers flew over the keys. She opened a new project tab labeled C1A AFLT 917. Subject, Rebecca A. Whitmore. Phase, passive audit escalation. Withheld visibility. Executive only. She tagged the session with an internal marker. Behavioral pattern, selective devaluation of high-status passenger, race/gender axis suspected. The software automatically pulled previous engagement logs from Becky Whitmore's flight history. A pattern began to form. 3 past flights, 2 flagged interactions, all involving black female passengers in premium seating, all dismissed as inconclusive during internal reviews. But Morgan Tech's audit didn't need subjective testimonies. It had numbers, timelines, sound. And the numbers were painting a story far louder than words. Meanwhile, Becky was back in the aisle, pouring coffee for Mr. Clayton, laughing softly at a joke he made about Swiss airports. "No layovers this time?" she asked, stirring cream into his cup. "Lucky you." She turned away, walked 2 steps, and didn't even glance at seat 1A. Celeste didn't respond, but she saw it. Every step, every name, every omission. And Kayla saw it too. The younger flight attendant stood quietly near the front galley, arms folded, pretending to inventory supply. But her eyes followed Becky. Her eyes returned again and again to Celeste. And when Celeste looked back this time, Kayla noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faint, pulsing blue light on the side of Celeste's smartwatch. In Manhattan, Aaliyah activated auto backup on the server partition handling Flight 917's audit stream. She encrypted the files, stored redundantly, and mirrored the data to a private executive vault with Celeste's signature key. Then she wrote a single internal note. Subject did not escalate verbally. Audit initiated purely via biometric trigger. Pattern strongly suggests behavioral bias from crew. She looked up at the skyline through the window. A grid of glowing lights, buildings like circuit boards. This wasn't a scandal. This was an algorithm with a heartbeat. And Celeste had just flipped the switch. Back on the plane, Celeste finally reached for her glass of water. Untouched since it was served. She took 1 sip. Cool. Flavorless. She placed it back on the tray. The seatbelt light blinked softly overhead. Nothing had changed on the surface. But beneath the silence, beneath the white leather seats and soft jazz and sparkling glasses, a system had been triggered. A signal had been sent. Evidence was compiling. And the woman in seat 1A wasn't waiting to be heard anymore. She was already being watched. Somewhere above the North Atlantic, a plane cut quietly through the dark. Inside, seat 1A remained still. Celeste hadn't moved for over 20 minutes. She didn't fidget, didn't adjust her seat. She simply watched the air around her. The elegant, curated normalcy of first-class rituals unfolding like a silent stage play. She wasn't waiting for someone to apologize. She was waiting for the numbers to speak. Back in Manhattan, Aaliyah Grant sat bathed in the glow of her monitors, deep in the 3rd layer of Stratus 917's live data stream. Lines of color moved across a behavioral heat map. Shades of green, amber, and red tracing movement, voice tone, proximity, eye contact, and frequency of guest name usage. She opened a compiled passenger interaction table. Each guest in first class had a row. Mr. Radcliffe, addressed by name 5 times. Mr. Clayton, 4. Ms. Darrow, 3. Seat 1A. Celeste Morgan, 0. Not even once. But that was just the beginning. Alia activated the bias pattern overlay. The screen flickered, recalibrated, and began marking subtle behavior gaps, not just in language but in posture, voice modulation, eye contact duration, and service delay. Becky Whitmore's metrics told a quiet story. Eye contact with white male passengers, 92%, with black male passengers, 11%. Full body orientation when serving men, 88%. Partial shoulder orientation with Celeste, 21%. Tonal variance in speech, elevated for male passengers, flattened for Celeste. Alia narrowed her eyes. "We don't need testimony," she whispered. "We have patterns." Becky, of course, didn't know. She moved through the aisle with a grace rehearsed over years, placing cups, pouring wine, folding napkins like origami. Her smile for Mr. Esposito in 2C was full and natural. When she approached Celeste, she didn't pause, she didn't glance, she didn't speak. Just passed by. To an outsider, it was nothing. To a system trained to see what humans rationalize away, it was everything. Meanwhile, a different part of the plane had begun to listen. Alia opened the AI-assisted voice review, a secondary audit layer that detected micro-variations in tone and phrasing. She fed it Becky's recorded statement. "Sorry, ma'am, we've run out of your entree." The system highlighted pitch flatness, absence of warmth, and clipped syllable endings. Compared with, "Mr. Radcliffe, still your favorite, isn't it?" That sentence glowed green. Vocal warmth, 92%. Emotional resonance, high. Stress patterns consistent with friendly familiarity. The contrast was stark. One was human, the other procedural, mechanical, dismissive. A sandwich, a shrug, a small act, but one that left behind 1,000 micro-clues. Further back, in the cruise service area, Kayla Dandridge stared at the tablet mounted beside the beverage station. It was showing an auto-loop of audio snippets, short ambient logs that helped attendants cross-check service delivery. She wasn't supposed to listen too long, but something held her there. "Mr. Radcliffe, would you like sparkling or still?" "Mr. Clayton, here's your Earl Grey." Ma'am, no names. Just that word, that small, flat word, used over and over, for one person only, hers. Kayla's stomach nodded. She remembered walking past 1A earlier. She remembered meeting Celeste's eyes. Remembered looking away. Now, hearing it played back, she realized even her silence had been recorded, even what she didn't say had become data. On Alia's screen, the final report began compiling. Bias Evidence Packet Seat 1A, Seat 917. It was a thick file, not in length, but in depth. No accusations, no adjectives, no opinion, just timestamps. 704, Seat 1B, greeted by name. 706, Seat 1C, greeted by name. 709, Seat 1A, acknowledged as ma'am. No eye contact. 734. Meal pre-ordered recorded as no escalation. 758. No water refill offered to Seat 1A. Each point followed by a color code. Amber. Red. 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 Alia didn't smile. She just hit encrypt plus store. Then added one note. Intentional exclusion behavior confirmed via multimodal cross-synamicus. Passive audit complete. Back in 1A, Celeste finally reached for her tablet. She didn't unlock it. Didn't need to. Her watch buzzed once, silently. 37. Behavioral bias markers detected. Escalation pending. Next step, optional. She placed the device back on her lap, folded her hands, closed her eyes for a moment. No triumph, no release. Only the quiet awareness that everything was now recorded, and more importantly, that she had never raised her voice to make it happen. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity. and clarity had arrived. Across the aisle, Becky poured the last of the evening's wine. She smiled at someone, laughed, glanced toward the cockpit. To her, the flight was going smoothly. To the system watching her, however, it was a performance under full surveillance. Taylor returned to the front of the cabin, eyes scanning. Celeste hadn't moved. She seemed at peace. But something in her presence had shifted, like the stillness before thunder. Kayla paused. The incident report terminal was still on, the button still pulsing, but she didn't press it. She didn't need to anymore, because now, for the first time, the silence was the proof. The cabin had settled into its artificial quiet. Overhead lights dimmed to a soft amber, casting a warm, expansive glow over champagne glasses and glossy tray tables. Most passengers had begun their descent into rest, reclining seats, folded blankets, eye masks halfway down. The illusion of comfort was complete, but not at seat 1A. Celeste Morgan sat upright, hands resting loosely on her lap, her watch dimmed now. The audit was complete, the evidence was stored, and yet the theater continued around her, unknowing, untouched. For now. A figure passed by, Daniel, one of the senior flight attendants, silver at the temples, posture perfect. He was balancing a tray of espresso shots and petit fours, his steps smooth, trained to disappear, until Celeste spoke. "Excuse me, Daniel," she said softly. He stopped, turned, smiled with the reflex of someone long practiced in poise. "Yes, ma'am," he answered, with polite ease. Celeste gave him a measured smile, not icy, not sharp, calm, almost pleasant. "Would you mind clarifying something for me?" Daniel's smile remained, but now it strained just slightly. "Of course," he said, readjusting his grip on the tray. "What do you need?" Celeste's voice stayed level, every syllable weighted like glass on marble. "What's the standard procedure," she asked, "when a pre-ordered meal is substituted without notice, and the guest is addressed only by a generic title rather than their name, repeatedly?" There was no shift in her tone, no heat, no threat, but something under her words made the air feel colder. Daniel blinked, just once, the way someone might when bright lights suddenly change. "Well," he began, "I believe there's a discretionary protocol depending on the flight load and available staff." His words hung in the air, unsure, untethered. "I see," Celeste replied gently, her gaze steady. "So the discretion includes forgetting someone's name, or just the meal?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes flicked toward the front of the cabin where Becky had just finished clearing an empty wine glass. She had heard. She froze for a second, not visibly, but her spine didn't move the way it normally did. Then she turned and started walking back toward them, slow, composed. Celeste didn't turn to look at her. Her attention remained on Daniel. Behind them, the hum of the plane's engine seemed louder somehow. Kayla stood near the galley curtain, hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. She had stopped pretending to inventory supplies. She was just listening now, heart pounding in her chest. That question, she had wanted to ask it herself once, years ago, when a passenger had looked her straight in the face and said, "You're doing a great job keeping the cabin clean." He had assumed he hadn't corrected him. Later, her supervisor had warned her, "Try not to make passengers uncomfortable with personal reactions. Stay neutral." She had been neutral ever since. But neutrality, she now realized, was just another kind of silence, and Celeste had just shattered it. Not with a demand, but with a question. Becky stopped a few steps behind Daniel. She didn't speak. Celeste turned her head, finally, and acknowledged her presence with a slight nod. "Rebecca," she said, her tone smooth as silk. "Would you like to add anything, since Daniel seems unsure?" There was no bite in the words, but there was something worse. Clarity. Becky's smile twitched. For a moment, The practiced professionalism faltered. "I believe we were following standard service guidelines," she said quickly. "We had to make adjustments due to catering issues, and I assure you no disrespect was intended." "I never said it was disrespectful," Celeste said, her voice still soft. "I just asked about the protocol, whether a passenger's name is considered optional." Becky didn't respond, not immediately. Celeste let the silence stretch, not awkward, but surgical. Then she turned back to Daniel and said, "That's okay. I think the system already answered it for me." No raised voice, no accusation, just that sentence. But it landed like a stone in still water. Across the cabin, no one moved. But energy shifted. People felt it, even if they didn't know what it was. In just 60 seconds, the most invisible person in the room had made herself the axis everything now turned around. Daniel offered a tight, professional nod and stepped back. Becky hesitated half a beat longer, then followed. Celeste returned to her seat and crossed her legs, unbothered. The moment was over, but the tremor it sent was still unfolding. In the front galley, Becky poured herself a glass of water, hands slightly shaking. Her mind was spinning, not just from the exchange, but from the feeling that something larger was unraveling, something she couldn't quite name. Was it just a passenger being difficult? No, it felt orchestrated, like she had walked onto a stage that had been set long before she arrived. Kayla stood quietly nearby. She didn't speak, but in her chest something subtle had loosened. Celeste hadn't yelled, she hadn't threatened, she had simply asked the one question no one had ever dared ask out loud. And no one could answer. Somewhere beneath the cabin floor, in secure servers, in encrypted logs, the data had already captured every pause, every dodge, every silence that spoke louder than words. But now, even the words themselves had begun to fracture the surface. And the woman in seat 1A? She had only just begun. The cabin had grown quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one hummed with tension, a kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it tightens, compresses, holds its breath. The question Celeste had asked was still hanging in the air, long after she'd asked it. No one had answered it, not really. But that wasn't the point. The point was someone had dared to ask it at all. And Kayla Dandridge couldn't stop hearing it replay in her head. Is a passenger's name considered optional? The words weren't loud. Celeste hadn't even raised her voice. But they had cut through everything, past etiquette, past training, past fear. They had landed in a place Kayla didn't want to acknowledge, because they landed in her. She stood near the back galley, fingers brushing the edge of the beverage cart, heart beating faster than it should have, not because of turbulence, but because for the first time in a long time she was remembering the time a passenger had handed her his trash with 2 fingers and said, "Thanks, sweetheart. You people are always so efficient." She had smiled then, said, "My pleasure, sir," then walked into the galley and pretended to organize napkins for 10 minutes just to breathe. Remembering the time she had greeted a woman in row 3 with a warm welcome aboard, Miss Green, only to be told later by her supervisor, "Be careful being too friendly with certain profiles, it can be misinterpreted." She had stopped using names after that, especially for passengers who looked like her. That was the job. Be smooth, be invisible, be compliant. But Celeste hadn't complied. She had asked the question. Kayla stole a glance forward. Celeste was still in 1A, poised and calm, her hands folded, her eyes closed. Not asleep, just still. She looked like someone who didn't need to win a conversation, because she already knew the outcome. Kayla felt a twist in her stomach. Celeste sat in a seat Kayla had never imagined for herself, not just physically, but symbolically. Power, command, presence. It wasn't the seat number that mattered. It was the spine. Celeste hadn't bent hers once. Kayla turned to the wall panel beside the galley. A soft glowing screen was embedded there. The crew activity terminal. It recorded everything. Logins, service paths, seat interactions, even incident reports. She tapped it awake. The screen blinked. A line of recent logs appeared. Seat 1A, interaction tag, Whitmore RA. Question posed, no response recorded. Nearby crew, Dandridge K. Proximity detected. Response, none. That one hit her like a cold wind. None. No words, no movement, no engagement. She had witnessed the moment, and the system had seen her do nothing. Kayla exhaled slowly. There was a part of her, the part trained by years of survival, that wanted to close the screen, walk away, get back to pouring coffee and smiling on cue. But another part, the part that had been watching Seat 1A since the moment Celeste walked on board, whispered, "Do something." It didn't have to be loud. It didn't even have to have her name on it, but it had to exist. She tapped the lower corner of the screen. Open incident report. A new window appeared. Type, internal service concern. Submitter, anonymous, optional. Her finger hovered. Then she typed, passenger in 1A was not addressed by name during multiple service interactions. Pre-ordered meal was denied without explanation. Passenger inquired about protocol. No sufficient response was given. She paused, then added one line. I witnessed it. I said nothing, but it happened. She tapped submit. The screen asked, do you wish to remain anonymous? She selected yes. The screen pulsed softly. Report logged. Incident ID, PAX 1A9, sealed. Kayla stared at the screen a moment longer, not with fear, with something else. Something like weight being redistributed. No one in the cabin had noticed, no chime had sounded, no announcement had been made. But somewhere the system had shifted, just slightly, because one more voice had entered the record. And this time, it wasn't silent. Back at 1A, Celeste opened her eyes. She didn't look around, didn't check her watch. But somehow, she knew. The atmosphere had changed again. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. In the back galley, Kayla turned away from the terminal. She straightened her posture, smoothed the front of her apron. Her shift wasn't over. Her voice still hadn't been heard, but it had been counted, and for the first time in a long time, when she stepped back into the aisle, she didn't look down. The flight log for Stratus 917 arrived quietly. No alarms, no flashing red lights. Just an automated alert, line 42 in a long list of system flags, inside a behavior monitoring dashboard at Stratus Air's Geneva Operations Center. But the title was different from the others. Priority passenger, Morgan Celeste, priority level 3 confirmation triggered, AI level 3 confirmation. Thomas Riedel, head of passenger compliance for Europe, sat back in his chair. He adjusted his glasses, clicked the file open, and stared. At first glance, it looked procedural. Then he saw the name, and everything in him stilled. He clicked again, expanded the data capsule, a screen filled with audit markers. There were 37 of them. THEREDOIT, Mark 7 to 1002 attached to the report, PAX 1A9. And beneath that, a chillingly simple tag, verified witness, Dandridge K. A crew member. That changed everything. Riedel's next move was automatic. His hand reached for the landline, reserved for escalations. It rang twice. Charles Edmonds? Sir? Riedel said. "We've got a situation on Flight 917, passenger incident. Normally this wouldn't cross your desk, but..." Charles cut in. "I don't want vague. Who's the passenger?" A pause. Celeste Morgan. Silence. On the other end, Charles stood from his conference table and stepped away from a live meeting on digital customer strategy. His mind was already ahead of the conversation. Celeste Morgan, CEO of Morgan Tech. The very woman Stratus Air had once profiled as a future partner in AI aviation strategy. The woman who'd once shared a fireside chat with him at the Davos Forum. The one who, unlike many disruptors, never made noise, because her data always spoke for her. And now, she'd pressed the button. Within minutes, Charles was in his private office. Riedel had already forwarded the full file. He opened it. The interface came alive. Heat maps of crew movement, audio overlays, interaction logs. One screen replayed a low-resolution clip from a security cabin sensor. A white attendant stepping past Celeste's seat without eye contact. Another, a meal tray placed with no explanation. Another, Celeste turning to a male attendant, speaking calmly, asking, "What's the standard procedure when a guest is referred to only as ma'am for an entire transatlantic flight?" Charles leaned closer. He scrubbed through the timeline. The AI flagged voice stress in the male attendant's response, and a complete tonal freeze from Becky Whitmore. Then came the system note. Witness statement received. Status: verified. Dandridge, Kayla. That was it. The flight attendant had corroborated the incident. Not a passenger, not a camera glitch, one of their own. Charles knew what this was. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't PR trouble. It was a data-backed, pattern-confirmed, AI-verified indictment of how bias functioned inside their most prestigious product offering, and it was tied to a woman who didn't send lawyers or press, but built the very technology now being used to expose the problem. He stood, eyes narrowing. "This doesn't get contained," he said aloud. "This gets dismantled." He returned to the conference room, tapped his executive comm system. "I want internal audit active on 917's entire crew past 6 quarters, he said. "Immediate. Quiet. I also want Geneva Airport operations to set up discreet deboarding for Seat 1A. No interaction from crew, no apology, no missteps." "Understood," came the response. He added one more instruction. "Draft a direct message from my desk. To be sent post-landing. No legal, no PR, only data. She doesn't need gestures. She needs accountability." Up in the sky, aboard Flight 917, nothing had changed. Becky poured sparkling water for the couple in 2B. She smiled, still unaware, still floating on autopilot. Daniel adjusted the cabin lighting, offered someone a blanket. Kayla walked the aisle with practiced composure, but something in her posture had stiffened. Not with fear, but with quiet resolve. And Celeste? She hadn't moved. She hadn't checked her tablet again, hadn't spoken, hadn't even made eye contact with anyone for nearly half an hour. But she knew, or maybe she didn't know exactly, but she had faith in what systems were meant to do when built with integrity. At Geneva International, a small protocol team began assembling near the private arrivals corridor. No uniforms, no commotion. A single placard read, "Morgan." They were under strict orders, no greetings, no questions, just escort. In the last 20 minutes of the flight, turbulence brushed the cavern light, unremarkable, but the real storm had already started. It wasn't up in the clouds, it was down below, in folders being opened, in systems being examined, in reputations being recalculated. Inside a quiet server room in New York, a second audit packet began auto-generating. Subject: Crew Bias Index, top 1% outliers. One name blinked red: Whitmore, RA. At 38,000 feet, Celeste looked out the window. Geneva's lights shimmered far below. She closed her eyes. She didn't know that someone had said her name in a call, in a meeting, in a command chain. She didn't need to know. She had already said everything she needed to, without saying a word. The tone chimed overhead. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The descent had begun. Seatbacks clicked upright. Tray tables folded. Eyes blinked awake behind sleep masks, and the city of Geneva shimmered into view below like a field of gold coins scattered on black velvet. Celeste Morgan opened her eyes. She didn't move immediately. She simply inhaled, then placed both hands on the armrests of seat 1A and adjusted herself into an upright position. Precise, composed. The crew moved about the cabin, checking belts, collecting stray glasses. Becky passed her row. Her steps were slower now, her posture slightly tighter. She didn't speak, didn't glance, but something in her shoulders had changed. That subtle tilt of a person who now realizes she's being watched, even if no one is looking directly at her. Celeste noticed, but she said nothing. Kayla came next. She stopped for a moment beside 1A, and maybe a second longer than needed. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Celeste looked up. Their eyes met. Kayla didn't speak either. She just nodded. Small, careful, not seeking approval, just acknowledgement. Celeste held her gaze, then returned the nod, and that was enough. The plane touched down at 6:11 a.m. local time. A soft bump, a steady roll. A brief silence as the engines reversed, slowing the world around them. The captain came over the PA. "Welcome to Geneva. Local time is 6:11. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off. Thank you for flying with us." The plane taxied to gate 34. Nothing unusual, no fanfare, no urgency. But waiting at the private jetway was a team. 3 staff members. Unbranded suits, one holding a discreet placard that read, "Morgan." No logos, no flowers, no apologies, just presence. The doors opened. Business class stood first as always, the shuffle of jackets, laptops, and designer bags. Seat 1A remained seated, still, steady. A moment later, Becky walked forward to prepare the exit. She glanced once toward the jetway, and then she saw it. Celeste stepped into the aisle, not hurried, not slow, just deliberate. Becky didn't say a word. Not thank you, not goodbye, not we hope to see you again, because she didn't know how to speak to someone who already had all the answers and hadn't needed to ask a single question out loud. The man with the placard nodded. "Miss Morgan." No handshakes, no smile, just a low voice, "This way." Celeste followed. Behind her, the other passengers started to disembark. Someone whispered, "She must be someone important." Another said, "Private security, maybe government," but no one really knew. Because real power doesn't explain itself, it just moves, and the world rearranges around it. An hour later, in her hotel suite overlooking Lake Geneva, Celeste sat on the balcony, tablet open in her lap. A message had arrived. From Charles Edmonds, CEO of Stratus Air, Europe. Subject line, "No explanation, just correction." Inside, a full internal memo marked confidential. The entire flight crew now under Level 2 audit. Becky Whitmore placed on immediate administrative review, data flagged for systemic bias review across premium service divisions. A final line in plain text. "You didn't raise your voice, but the system heard you anyway." Celeste closed the tablet. She didn't reply. There was nothing to say. At the airport, Kayla Dandridge stepped off the staff shuttle. The sun was just beginning to climb, casting pale light across the tarmac. Her crew badge vibrated gently. She checked the notification. Witness statement received. Verified. Record preserved. It was a system message. No emotion, no signature. But to Kayla, it felt like closure. Or maybe a beginning. She looked up at the aircraft she had just exited, now being refueled for its return trip. She didn't feel guilt. She didn't feel pride. Just clarity. And in this job, clarity was rare currency. She walked on. Outside the terminal, Celeste stepped into the morning light. No cameras, no escort. Just the muted sound of wheels rolling across concrete and a breeze that carried the scent of lake water and steel. People passed her. No one stared. No one knew. But one man, middle-aged, wearing a pressed charcoal coat, brushed past her shoulder and paused. He looked back, squinted slightly, then said, "Excuse me, Miss Morgan?" Celeste turned her head slightly. He gave a polite nod. That was all. But for the first time in nearly 12 hours, someone had said her name. She didn't stop. She didn't smile. She just kept walking. Because the point was never to be recognized, it was to make sure they remembered. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already left something behind that no one on that plane would forget. That concludes The Passenger in Seat 1A. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you. Stories like this aren't about volume, they're about weight. And if it stayed with you even for a moment, then maybe it was worth telling. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe for more stories that don't shout, they linger. And let me know in the comments, what part of this story hit you the hardest and why? I read every word. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and always stay listening.